So Fox News, as of late, has been particularly obnoxious and loud in their obsession with cancel culture and Dr. Seuss and the Muppets and Mr. Potato Head. But another issue that they've been obsessed with is the issue of transgender Americans. And they've talked about this quite a bit since Joe Biden took office. Take a look.
Biden has single-handedly destroyed the sports dreams of a whole generation of young girls.
Joe Biden found enough time to do an executive order that would allow transgender males to compete in women's sports.
It basically destroys girls' sports.
Probably the greatest blow to women's rights we've seen in decades.
Democrats are pushing a terrifying agenda that eliminates women.
Force biological males into female sports competitions
and be in their locker rooms.
I call it the Sodom and Gomorrah Declaration.
It's a crime against nature.
Essentially, the Gay and Transsexual Supremacy Act.
Instead of killing COVID, Biden's killing women's sports instead.
Blow up women's sports.
Men participate in women's sports. We don't want men participating in women's sports.
Erode women's sports.
Eliminating Title IX for women's sports.
Making sure biological men could play girls' sports.
First things he did was eliminate women's sports.
Compete in sports against women.
To allow men who identify as women to be on their sports teams.
Biological boys now be allowed to compete against girls.
We're going to destroy women's sports. Next.
Make women compete against biological males.
Transgender athletes.
Radical transgender executive order.
The transgender executive order.
Transgender rights.
All of this transgender stuff.
We cannot indoctrinate our kids, one with these antichrist beliefs.
We can go on this forever, but sadly it's coming from America and it's infecting the world. It's usually the opposite, and I'm embarrassed by it.
Yeah, so it's really obvious what they're trying to do. They are deliberately trying to get their viewers to perceive trans people as a threat. They're not explicitly saying this, but this is what they're priming their viewers to believe. And they can raise the salience of this issue, get their viewers to believe it's more important than it actually is, simply by talking about it a lot. And according to an analysis by Media Matters, they have talked about this a lot, because between Joe Biden's inauguration and March 18th, which is the period in which Media Matters conducted this analysis, they've aired 86 anti-trans segments, and the majority of these segments focused heavily on issues related to transgender youth, the most at-risk category of trans Americans who are at high risk for self-harm and suicide attempts. So this is absolutely nefarious. This is going to have a real-world impact on the lives of transgender Americans, particularly trans youth. And it's disgusting. And they're lying about what Joe Biden's executive order did. They're trying to make it seem as if Joe Biden's executive order literally destroyed women's sports. Now, they don't necessarily explain why that's the case, but what was Joe Biden's executive order? Like, what did it say specifically about transgender folks? It just said that federal agencies can't discriminate against transgender Americans. The only thing that it said about trans youth and sports is, quote, children should be able to learn without worrying about whether they will be denied access to the restroom, the locker room, or school sports. But if you're Fox News, you twist that to make it seem as if this is an attack on women's sports. Interesting. How could a reasonable person deduce from that sentence that this is the destruction of women's sports? Well, nobody would think that this is the takeaway here. But Fox News has an agenda. It is an anti-trans agenda that is driving hatred. Hatred that is so severe culturally and socially that trans youth try to kill themselves more often than their cis peers. Fox News doesn't care because they've got ratings. They've got an agenda to sell to their viewers. So it doesn't matter what the consequences are of their bigoted coverage, they're going to talk about it. Now, the reason why Fox News focuses on the trans sports issue so much is because, like the bathroom panic issue, they're able to persuade more people here. Trans athletes, contrary to popular belief, are not destroying sports for cis women. That's not happening. The anecdotes that they point to and prop up, this is part of their propaganda effort. But what these bills that have been introduced around the country related to transgender athletes in sports pertain to, who it would affect, are families like this.
My name is Brandon Bulware, and Chairman, I'll go as quickly as I can. I'm a lifelong Missourian. I'm a business lawyer. I'm a Christian. I'm the son of a Methodist minister. I'm a husband. I'm the father of 4 kids, 2 boys, 2 girls, including a wonderful and beautiful transgender daughter, who today happens to be her birthday. And I chose to be here. She doesn't know that. She thinks I'm at work. One thing I often hear when transgender issues are discussed is, I don't get it. I don't understand. And I would expect some of you to have said that and feel the same way. I didn't get it either. For years, I didn't get it. For years, I would not let my daughter wear girl clothes. I did not let her play with girl toys. I forced my daughter to wear boy clothes and get short haircuts, play on boy sports teams. Why did I do this? To protect my child. I did not want my daughter or her siblings to get teased. And truth be told, I did it to protect myself as well. I wanted to avoid those inevitable questions as to why my child did not look and act like a boy. My child was miserable. I cannot overstate that. She was absolutely miserable, especially at school. No confidence, no friends, no laughter. I honestly say this, I had a child who did not smile. We did that for years. We did that against the advice of teachers, therapists, and other experts. I remember the day everything changed for me. I'd gotten home from work, and my daughter and her brother were in the front lawn. And my daughter had sneaked on one of her older sister's play dresses. And they wanted to go across the street and play with the neighbor's kids. It was time for dinner. I said, come in. She asked, can she go across the street? I said, no. She asked me if she went inside and put on boy clothes, could she then go across the street and play? And it's then that it hit me that my daughter was equating being good with being someone else. I was teaching her to deny who she is. As a parent, the one thing we cannot do, the one thing, is silence our child's spirit. And so on that day, my wife and I stopped silencing our child's spirit. The moment we allowed my daughter to be who she is, to grow her hair, to wear the clothes she wanted to wear, she was a different child. And I mean, it was immediate. It was a total transformation. I now have a confident, a smiling, a happy daughter. She plays on a girls' volleyball team. She has friendships. She's a kid. I came here today as a parent to share my story. I need you to understand that this language, if it becomes law, will have real effects on real people. It will affect my daughter. It will mean she cannot play on the girls' volleyball team or dance squad or tennis team. I ask you, please don't take that away from my daughter or the countless others like her who are out there. Let them have their childhoods. Let them be who they are. I ask you to vote against this legislation.
How could anyone with a heart actually not see through this? See what is obviously happening? They're using the trans athlete issue to drive transphobia, and even members of the left fall for it oftentimes. But in actuality, as the ACLU puts it, hysteria over trans women in sports is nothing more than a coordinated attack on trans student athletes. But some people try to justify their bigotry by feigning concern over women's sports. But if you actually cared about women's sports and allowing women a space to compete in sports, well, you're not proving that you're actually concerned, because as Viviana Vigil points out in a segment for Rebel HQ, there's a lot of other issues that impact women's sports more so than trans athletes. Take a look.
I got something to show y'all. So for the NCAA March Madness, the biggest tournament in college basketball for women, this is our weight room. Let me show y'all the men's weight room.
This is Sedona Prince, an athlete on the women's basketball team at Oregon whose video has gone viral, pointing out the gross inequality of how women and male athletes are treated during the huge March Madness competition. The men have a state-of-the-art, expansive weight room, and the women are given a small stack of hand weights and some sanitized yoga mats. The NCAA has made a statement acknowledging the discrepancy, apologizing, but chalking it up to a matter of limited space and resources. Well, Sedona debunked that myth pretty quick.
Let me show y'all something else. Here's our practice court, right? And then here's that weight room. And then here's all this extra space.
Representative Tulsi Gabbard and many GOP leaders have spoken out about the importance of women's competitive sports.
Title IX is a historic provision to make sure that women and girls have equal opportunities, especially as it relates to competitive sports.
So Tulsi should be pretty upset about what's going on, but no, not a peep from her about this viral video, proving that the extreme right has never really cared about women's competitive sports and have been using the issue as a facade because of the push to expand Title IX to include sexual orientation and gender identity as protected classes. Protecting women's competitive sports has been an excuse by the extreme right to promote fear-mongering, transphobia, bigotry, and dehumanization of our transgender community.
Biological boys are going to start playing in girls' sports.
Not only will they be on her playing field that she has to compete against them, they will be in her locker room, they will be in her showers, they will be in her bathroom, they will be in her hotel room when she travels with her team.
Title IX does not reference or deal with transgender individuals.
As it will put trans rights above women's rights.
Will it though? And Tulsi Gabbard says that transgender people storming into women's competitive sports is a huge problem. And she has a solution. Just keep them out completely.
A high school student who wrote me yesterday is concerned. So I introduced science-based legislation called the Protect Women's Sports Act that clarifies, upholds, and strengthens the original intent of Title IX. It ensures a level playing field for girls and women competing in sports.
Will you cite any examples where a young woman was denied a scholarship opportunity or a title here in Arizona?
I can't at this point.
So there are none in Georgia.
We don't have hard statistics on that.
It is the height of hypocrisy.
I don't know of any personally in Tennessee.
It is the height of hypocrisy.
How many instances have we had of trans females competing in women's sports?
To my knowledge, none.
Just face it. Nobody is changing their gender identity just to compete in women's sports. It is a decision that affects every single aspect of their life. And the right has simply used anecdotal examples to induce fear and anger towards the transgender community.
And she's exactly right. And I'm going to link you to the full video because Viviana does a phenomenal job at explaining how hypocritical people are who focus on transgender athletes. If you genuinely cared about women's sports, why wouldn't you focus on the inequities between men and women in sports? To focus on this insignificant issue, trans athletes in sports, doesn't that seem a little bit weird, like your priorities are misplaced? It's almost like you're using that as an excuse to hate on trans people, to fearmonger about trans people, to drive home the narrative that trans people are dangerous to cis people. It might not be in the traditional way that conservatives fearmonger about it. And, we might have moved on from the bathroom panic thing because that's not very persuasive and there's no evidence of it. So now we're focusing on the transgender athletes and sports issues. And this time will pass. People will move on because there's not enough evidence to deduce that trans athletes are ruining sports for cis women. And there will be another issue. We'll just keep moving the goalpost because this is what we do in America. We hate people who are different. And it's disgusting. You'd think that even members of the LGBTQ community would understand this, but there are gay public figures who are against trans people as well. It's disheartening to me. And of course, I'm talking about Glenn Greenwald, who hasn't necessarily said anything about trans sports to my knowledge, but in an interview with Katie Herzog, I think is her name, they were talking about how all of a sudden, people in the trans community are basically coming out because they get more social clout for coming out as trans.
Is that the minute you declare yourself non-binary or trans, you kind of catapult up the ladder of oppression in a way that absolutely confers very concrete benefits, and anyone who denies that is being dishonest.
Absolutely.
What trans people need are allies on the left, in the LGBTQ community itself. But Fox News, it shows how powerful and influential they are to where their propaganda still penetrates social discourse, even on the left, even in the LGBTQ community. Isn't that insane? Isn't that something that you think wouldn't be possible? Since gay people know firsthand what it's like to be discriminated against specifically because they violate gender norms. It's morally reprehensible. And because of all of this hatred and fear-mongering, people are going to die. That's what this hatred fosters. Self-hate to the point where people want to take their own lives and harm themselves, especially trans youth. And that's what Fox News is doing here. And shame on anyone who engages in it, and also shame on the leftists who are supposed to be trans allies who are silent. Any leftist who doesn't defend their trans comrades and non-binary comrades, your silence is deafening. And we see you. You're a coward. Right now, it's kind of difficult to speak up because there's a lot of people who hate transgender people. So maybe leftists don't want to speak out at the behest of transgender Americans because they feel like, this is just going to drive people away. And I don't want to be seen as unpopular. I want to do what's socially acceptable. So I'm just going to remain silent because that's easier. I'm not going to engage in the bigotry, but I'm just going to at least keep my mouth shut. That's being a coward. And your silence is deafening. We're not going to forget this.